Hello again and welcome to Herd Immunity News. My name is Marcus Bozza. Tonight on the channel we have Jim Ferguson. Jim Ferguson, like myself, is a former PPC with the Brexit Party. He is a businessman, an entrepreneur, and currently has a fantastic wave of media stories, accounts, reports coming out, which you can find on his Twitter page. Jim is getting millions of followers from all over the world, and quite recently he had a very famous heroic follower by the name of General Michael Flynn. So firstly, let me welcome you to the show, Jim, and how's it going?
Well, thanks very much indeed. I'm delighted to be a guest on Herd Immunity News with you again, Marcus. It's been busy. I've been engaging with people in the United States and Canada, and I'm looking and France, and I'm looking to get some more people up onto the channel to talk about things that are happening in their own areas and their own countries. And so far, it's been very interesting what I've been hearing. So yes, we are reaching an unbelievable amount of people. Really are. It's quite incredible, and I'm just very grateful to the people out there who are making it all happen, because I'm only one voice. But when all these thousands and thousands of people are amplifying it, then collectively we're becoming a voice that's reaching multiple tens of millions of people all around the world. And yes, I was a little bit surprised but delighted that General Michael Flynn, followed me, who's obviously very, very close to President Trump, and an incredible man who is just one of these distinguished military commanders who's got the respect of rank and file alike, and many, many millions of people in America and all around the world. So yeah, I was very pleased that he said what he said about me.
Absolutely, absolutely. An amen to your sentiments regarding those people that are getting in touch with us, following us, and contributing towards our work that we do. Without them, we would be nothing. So let me just support exactly those words, Jim, and very well said. Now, if we can talk about NATO this evening and where NATO is going, before I do, I'm going to briefly just go over a little bit of history in this. Back in 2016, the then Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, invited Nigel Farage for a head-to-head. At the time, Nigel was leader of the Brexit Party, or he was involved at the forefront with UKIP in getting our sovereignty back. Now, at that meeting, Nick Clegg spoke of Nigel's assessment that the EU was trying to form an army as conspiracy theory. He said he may as well be talking about the moon landings or any such matters like that. Forward to 2022, last year, the very brief prime ministership of Liz Truss. Ms. Truss went over to France and had a meeting with the French president, Monsieur Macron. And there was a formation of what was called the European Political Community. And part of that community was an organization called PESCO. Now, PESCO was the EU's permanent structured cooperation between all the military forces. So in effect, and what you're going to go on to talk about, in effect, Liz Truss signed the British Armed Forces under a European Union control. What's happening with NATO? Where is all this going, Jim?
I think it's important to understand what NATO is and what it's not. NATO is a defensive force to protect the members of NATO against an attack. It is not an offensive structure and should never be used as such. But where we're going with it, well, I think there's a couple of big developments that's happened, Marcus, and one of those things is the visit to the UK from Joe Biden, but also his rather interesting snub of Ben Wallace in favour of the new leader of NATO being Ursula von der Leyen, who is currently the head of the European Union, president there. If you look at Ursula von der Leyen's record when she was defence minister for Germany, her capabilities were almost a zero. And indeed, on many different exercises being conducted with Germany's involvement in NATO, she was so disorganized that German forces were actually practicing with broom handles. I kid you not. And she is probably one of the worst people to have in that kind of position. Now, it looks like Biden is attempting to pressure Britain into joining an EU army, which is very interesting, especially as you alluded to, Nick Clegg had said to Nigel Farage on that very well publicised debate that Nigel was really just talking a lot of rubbish and that there was no plans to have a European military capability in the form of an EU army. And of course, we all suspect that that was absolute nonsense, which of course it is. So Biden has betrayed Britain and what he's doing. But there's also something else that's deeply concerning that the people in Britain need to understand. And once again, it's kind of linked into our old boss, Nigel Farage again. Because just as we heard within the last week or so, Nigel had all of his bank accounts closed down for very, very strange and weird and wonderful reasons. Suggestions that he was, because he was politically active and they didn't agree with his position on certain things, which is ridiculous, but nevertheless it happened. But there are also these banks, many of whom are WEF affiliated, World Economic Forum members, have targeted British defence contractors and closed their bank accounts down as well. And the resulting effect of that, Marcus, is that these defence contractors can't build, buy, or manufacture all the components that they need for our British military. And you have to understand what's going on the other side of this. When you talked about PESCO, you've got the European Union that are trying to set up one contractor that's all under their control to manufacture ammunition that they want to have. So you can see there is a multiple attack going on Britain at the moment from Joe Biden, from the European Union, and the WEF-controlled banks. Just that, like they've targeted Nigel and many other people who are patriots in this country, they're now attacking our defence infrastructure. And that is very serious. It's like they're almost trying to blackmail, strong-arm Britain into signing over its military capability for the Royal Navy, the Royal Air Force and the British Army, along with our security apparatus, which includes MI5, and the Secret Intelligence Services, MI6, and also GCHQ, that listens in on transmissions at the global level. So it's very serious indeed. All the while, we see Biden and his administration in America betraying his own country and leading us into potentially an armed conflict with Russia just by basically taking Ukraine in. They're pushing for war, Marcus, and it could happen very, very quickly.
Well, that's some amazing information that you've just given us tonight here on our channel, because not everyone will be aware of the contractor's position. Nigel Farage has been the official whistleblower, Jim, when it comes to those that have had their bank accounts closed and stopped. And as it turns out, thousands of ordinary citizens, yourself included, which you've made public, have been almost made non-people, persona non grata, as I say. And just going back to what you were saying about Joe Biden, Joe Biden is absolutely no friend of the United Kingdom whatsoever. He's made this clear time and time again. He wished that Britain had remained part of the European Union. You correctly pointed out that Ben Wallace, our Defence Secretary, who is a military man, would have been an ideal candidate to head up NATO instead of Ursula von der Leyen, who had 6 years as the German defence minister. And as you correctly point out, the German military and armed forces were in such poor order that they had to replace guns and weaponry with papier-mâché tanks and broom handles. Now, what we see right now, Nigel Farage predicted this, and it's all coming true, even though he was called a conspiracy theorist by the likes of Facebook's director or whatever job he's got now, Nick Clegg. What worries a lot of people is that Biden is obviously not in control of anything, Jim. That's a farce now, and it's out in the open. But you have characters in the background, like Mr. Blinken. Now, Mr. Blinken is part of the Obama regime, and he's also a driving force in the warmongering that we see going on right now. Biden has been pushing for cluster bombs to be used in Ukraine. Now, these are weapons that have been banned, or they've certainly by the United Nations they've been sort of earmarked as not for use. There's 123 signatories, of which the United Kingdom is one, to say that they should not be used. From the podium in the White House last year, Jen Psaki at the time, who was the press secretary for Biden, said that any use of cluster bombs was a human rights breach. So what's going on now with Biden and the use of these cluster bombs? Where is he going with this?
Well, he let slip. I mean, Biden is in my opinion, a national security liability, and he made an off the cuff comment in front of reporters just within the last sort of 48 hours, where he was asked the question about the cluster bombs going to Ukraine, and he said because America had run out of ammunition.
Wow, that's absolutely astounding. And just to go on a little bit about running, if I can, just quickly on the UK armed forces, I did a little bit of research and I found out in 2020, British armed forces were sitting around 105,000 back in in 2000. We are now sitting at 74,000. This is just the army alone. And if we go back to 1982 in the Falklands War, we had 163,000 armed personnel. So we're just in a situation in the United Kingdom right now, Jim, where our army is being dismantled in front of our faces. Where does this end?
Well, I've always believed in peace through strength, and I think that it's almost inviting the enemies of Britain to attack. I'm a great believer in peace, which is why I've been talking about President Viktor Orban in Hungary quite regularly, actually, over the last few days, because and again today, because he wants to see peace in Ukraine. And there are good people in countries that are resisting this whole EU WEF ideology. He understands what they're doing to respective nation states with mass migration, how they're weakening the states because they want a global world order. So people like him are speaking up about where are we? Well, you've got to remember, as we've discussed, we have people who are in positions of trust. We've got a World Economic Forum chancellor. We've got a World Economic Forum prime minister whose loyalty is to German Klaus Schwab and not to the British people, as evidenced by the boats that keep on coming in and invading our shores. In fact, if anything, they are deliberately accelerating this because they want to destabilize the national sovereignty of this country. It is by design. It is happening, but quite deliberately. So by weakening our armed forces, by forcing them to cut back on defence funding, and now we see a very insidious attack by banks that are operating in Britain to target defence contractors. It's almost like we really are, as a country, under attack, but from within. We are being attacked from within. The enemy is within the gates.
Absolutely, Jim. And many commentators have said we're behaving like a defeated nation under control of a world power already. And you can see that with the Rishi Sunak's complete ineffectiveness at stopping mass unlimited migration. We were at 1.2 overall migration and 600,000 plus in net migration. These are completely unsustainable numbers. A lot of people are worried.
Some might argue that he's actually extremely effective at what he's doing. But what he's doing is WEF policy. He's not defending Britain's interests. So I understand what you're saying, but yeah, he's actually being extremely effective, and German Klaus Schwab is actually extremely happy with him at the moment.
Yeah, forgive me. The incompetence argument is really dead in the water now. That's what a lot of the mainstream media calls them, is just completely incompetent and inept. But as you correctly say, they're very competent. at carrying out the orders which are coming from their boss, Klaus Schwab, at the World Health Organization. So we're in a situation that is more than troubling because, as you've just revealed to us tonight, our manufacturers of weapons are being hobbled and handcuffed. What can they do to turn this around and actually start manufacturing? And what can our government do to increase the number of our armed forces?
Well, our government could start being loyal to Britain, to the British military and its citizens, but they don't seem to want to do that. I'm not saying that every single person that's in the Conservative members of Parliament, that they're all bad, but there's just nobody there that's really doing much to stand up and speak out. And we saw that when Andrew Bridgen was still a Conservative member of Parliament, when he was speaking out about vaccine harm and injuries to children and trying to shed a light on it. And they turned on him, and nobody, I don't think, or maybe there was one or two that did try to help him, but they cut him adrift. And then we had the Reform Party dismissed him out of hand. We had Richard Tice that could have had his first member of Parliament. Richard could have been down there doing what Lawrence Fox is doing, but he just doesn't have the vision. And the Reform Party could be doing so much better and could have performed so much better at the last local elections. Unfortunately, Nigel's not there leading the party. And there are good people there like Ben Habib and others, but they're not getting the opportunity to take control and lead it. If they did, and they united with the likes of the UKIP, United Kingdom Independence Party, Heritage, ADF, English Constitution Party, and all these others would all probably rally round. And there might be an opportunity then to put pressure on the Conservative Party while they're still there in power. But I reckon that they're going to get wiped out. But the problem is, people need to understand and recognise that Sir Keir Starmer is also in the same club that Richie Sunak's in. They're one and the same. They're all WEFers together, and they've got no loyalty to this country whatsoever.
It's quite incredible that we see a rise in conservatism in the United States with the Donald Trump MAGA movement. The Donald Trump train is back. It's leading in the polls. He has a clear gap between himself and Ron DeSanctimonious, as he calls him, or Ron DeSantis, to give the Florida governor his proper and correct name. And also with the Joe Biden regime, he's under pressure from Robert Kennedy Jr. We've seen the rise in conservatism in Italy. We've seen the rise in conservatism in the Netherlands with the current results that we've seen there and the departure of your old friend, Mr. Russ. Why in the United Kingdom are we not seeing a rise in conservatism within the Conservatives? All we see is a party that could be Labour, but by another name.
I think the Conservatives are, and I think they're there in significant numbers. But what is lacking in the United Kingdom at the moment is a true natural-born leader. And if they could find that person that has the ability to take all the people with him, not just other parties, but the people of this country, reach out to those that are on the moderate left, reach out to those that are on the moderate right, get the people behind them and lead from the front. That is what's needed. But at the moment, nobody has been identified that could fulfill that role. And there are people that I've alluded to in previous podcasts with you, Marcus, on Herd Immunity News,
yes,
where we've discussed the fact that there are some very powerful, very wealthy people in this country that are certainly for Britain and want the best for the British state. They need to make some hard decisions, and they need to make it fairly quickly. They need new blood. And if they don't get an infusion of new blood, new ideas, and new leaders, then unfortunately, I see further decline, instability, and dare I say it, Britain could cease to be.
Well, that's a very gloomy, doomy outlook, but it's hard to argue on all the points that you're making. We certainly have a Conservative government, a Labour Party, an SNP, Liberal Democrat, and we'll throw the one Green candidate. We won't forget Caroline Lucas down there in Brighton. We've got to be inclusive. We'll throw her in as well. That no
Do
one
we
can
have to?
Well, no, we can edit that out later. We do, for those with sensitive palates. Look, we can put them all in one big lump in one big cluster. But is part of the reason that we see this quickening, Jim, of all these world economic ideologies such as mass immigration, net zero, and the allowance of the deep state to run riot over policy and regulation? Is it because they fear Donald Trump's going to be back in the White House next year?
Yeah, they're terrified, absolutely terrified of Donald Trump, but they're also quite terrified of Robert Kennedy.
Yes.
And as a conservative, as a right-leaning political person, I actually, although we've talked about Robert Kennedy in the past, it's worth saying it again. He's got some great ideas, and he's not part of the deep state, and neither were his fellow relatives. The Kennedys were not. They weren't part of that either, believe it or not, which is why they lost their lives. So what we've got to watch that closely. I sort of made a comment the other day about how I thought it might be interesting, to see something happen with Donald Trump and Robert Kennedy maybe running together on a similar ticket or on the same ticket. I mean, there were a lot of people that actually thought that could work. There were others that said that it had been suggested before and that it wouldn't. But let's talk about Donald Trump, because I'm a Trump guy,
Yes, yeah.
and I've always admired him, and I've watched what he does closely, and I watched a brilliant YouTube there. Just he was speaking to a big audience again, about 50,000 people, and he was talking about the farming industry, and he was talking about the support that he brought. He even relayed a story about Emmanuel Macron, which is really funny. It was to do with how Macron was basically running circles around his team, and then Donald Trump decided to make a phone call to Macron, and within 3 minutes Macron had buckled and agreed not to put tariffs on American trade and American goods. So Donald's a tough guy, and I have to say I have got huge respect for him. So the deep state fear him, the WEF fear him, because he is anti-globalist. But what we need are people like General Flynn, Donald Trump, Viktor Orban, and others who have that gravitas, who have that deep understanding, to stand up as they are and speak out, as General Flynn just did. General Flynn has warned about the New World Order and the rise of the World Economic Forum and how they are coming for America. Well, I believe they're already there, and they're already here in the UK, and they're already in Europe. These people have got to be stopped.
Absolutely. When we look at the electoral system that they have in the United States and PR that they have throughout Europe, they're at an advantage there because those grassroots conservative parties have an opportunity to gather a lot of momentum. You just have to go back to 2014, where under Nigel's leadership, UKIP got 4 million votes, but only had one seat. The SNP had a quarter of that vote and ended up with 50 odd seats. So political change and electoral change in the UK, I think, might be essential to do it. But in the meantime, you've alluded to a Unite the Right movement, which takes those parties that you've mentioned, Reform, Reclaim, UKIP, the Heritage Party, and the other ones. This will, I think, require a new leader. Nigel will be the kingmaker. Nigel will anoint whoever is going to take over. And they'll have to put those egos aside. A lot easier said than done. They'll have to unite for the right reasons. And it's funny, Richie Sunak asked Conservatives to unite or die, even though he wasn't actually elected to the job. But is it a case that Conservatives in Britain, or even centrists to centre-rightists, they have to unite or die? Is that fair?
Well, yes, they do, but there needs to be somebody to unify them, and that is going to have to take somebody that can find common ground with everybody else, can speak with people that might not be necessarily in agreement about some things, be, almost a bit like Donald Trump, where you talk about the art of the deal, being able to compromise, be able to give something to somebody in return for their loyalty, in return for their support. The same with everybody else that's sitting around the table. Get people round the table, and that's not happened, at least not with the Reform Party, which is a crying shame, because the Reform Party has wonderful people in it and incredibly good candidates, many of whom I helped to interview when I was in the Brexit Party, and then when they crossed over to Reform, Reform got them. So there are really good people out there, and there are really good people in Reform, but their leadership is not. And I'm not counting Nigel in that. And I know that Nigel's in a, I forget what his actual position is. Is he chairman or something? I can't remember.
Is he president of Reform?
Is it president? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, whatever it is, Nigel's there. But, one thing I will say, Nigel is pissed off at what the banks have done to him. Absolutely. He's really annoyed. And he's also annoyed at what he's seeing with Joe Biden trying to strong arm Britain into joining a European army. He is really pissed off. And I'll tell you, I wouldn't be surprised if Nigel didn't just, take the gloves off and come out swinging. And if he did, he would win a great deal of support. But if he's not, then as you say, he needs to find somebody who's got the ability to stand up and lead, to stand up and do the right thing for this country, not putting their ego in the way, not putting what they'll get out of it in the way, somebody that's willing to do it for the right reasons, for the people of Great Britain and our allies around the world, somebody that can actually make it work and put the values of the British people before anybody else.
Well, that is what the job is meant to entail, to put the national sovereignty through parliamentary sovereignty as your first priority, is securing your borders, your laws, your own people and their future and that of their families. But I do think we're at a stage now in the Conservative Party where there is a breakaway forming, and it may well be with the right leader of this movement that there's a possibility that some of them might come over and jump ship before they're lined up against the wall and taken out politically. We've seen the formation of the Conservative Democratic organisation where 17 MPs have broken off. Jacob Rees-Mogg is among those ranks. We've also seen the formation of New Conservatism, which again, I said, sounds a bit like New Labour, which kind of makes me head for the heart pills, Jim, when I think about Blair and New Labour and Mandelson and Alistair Campbell and Diane Abbott. I don't really want to go back to those. Or Margaret Beckett, God bless her, and even John Prescott, who could pack a punch. I just want to say, look, is there a chance that the Conservatives, any of them, will jump ship and form an alliance? Do you think they've got the bottle or the resolve to maybe do something like that? Or they just like a whimper to electoral defeat? What will happen?
I would like to think that they would, but the reality is they probably won't. They probably know they're going to get wiped out, so they will probably hang on as long as they possibly can so that they can keep their ministerial cars and their perks and their expenses going and their bribes from the EU if they're loyal to the EU. Yeah, all of that will continue, I think, because they're inherently dishonest. They've lost their way a long time ago, and they've only been kept there because people believed that they were still Conservative, but I think they're waking up to the fact that they're not. I just hope that those people that might be traditional Labour Party members or voters will realise this exactly the same thing has happened to their party, and their leader, Keir Starmer, is certainly not what you would call a traditional Labour man. He is a Davos man. He said it publicly. His loyalty is to Klaus Schwab and the global New World Order, and not to the people of Britain. So what I think needs to happen is, as I've said, it requires somebody that can unite the parties, somebody that's got no previous baggage, as it were, with any of them, somebody that actually can speak on the level that they accept and can negotiate and bring them together. And if that happens, Britain might stand a chance. And I think if that did happen under a good leader, I think that you would find that people all over the country would support that, because they know what this government has done. They know they're not Conservatives. They know that Labour's not a Labour Party anymore. So I think if a new, strong leader came along that was honest up front and could actually take it forward, the country would support that person.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Sorry, on you go.
No, I was just going to finish off by saying I haven't seen any evidence of that yet. It might well be that there is somebody there, but as you say, would have to give that person his blessing before the loyalists to Nigel would ever accept anybody coming in. But as you say, he could be a kingmaker in that. He could anoint somebody to take that role on and move it forward. And I would like to think that that would happen for the sake and the good of the country and its people.
Yes, in 2016, the public voted 52% to 48% to leave the European Union. It was the biggest electoral outcome in our history, with more people taking part in that decision, in that vote, than at any other time in our history. The 2019 general election, for many, was another referendum replayed, in which Boris Johnson had an 80-seat majority. So it was a clear victory, and Brexit was at the heart of that. Get Brexit done was the logo, was the motto that took Johnson over the line, and he was running against Jeremy Corbyn. That mood and that passion hasn't left anyone, including, like the good people of Barnsley that you spent time with, Labour voters were sick to the teeth of seeing our laws, our borders, our regulations being breached. We've further seen a destruction of our heritage, our culture, our religions, our children, our schools. People have seen enough. And I think you're absolutely right. Labour voters, disillusioned Conservative voters, and the silent majority will come back to the ballot box and they'll vote for a new party with the right leadership. Couple of minutes left, Jim. Anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I would just, when you mentioned Barnsley, I still get communications from people in there, great people, and you're right, they are still feeling very much the same as they were when I was there. So, when all is said and done, the country has got enormous challenges now and moving into the future. It's vitally important that the country pulls together for the sake of the people, for the sake of the country, and for the sake of all the institutions that we hold dear, like our military, to support them. And I don't think very much support is there for them at this present point. Our military are incredibly brave, very, very disciplined. They are one of the best armies, I would say, for their size and capability. They are punching well above their weight. And you have to remember, maybe I'm biased, but I come from a long line of military people. So I would just say that for their sake, for the people's sake, for the country's sake, we've got to get a grip of this, and we've got to fight and understand who our real enemies are. And let me say it again, the enemy is within the gates. They're not beyond our shores anymore. They're here now, and they're getting packed in ever-increasing numbers. And we've got to be aware of that, because I don't want to see the kind of things that happened in France just 2 weeks ago happening here in the UK.
Very true indeed, Jim. Well, let me just conclude by thanking you so much once again for joining us here on Herd Immunity News. Please, if you haven't already, check out the Twitter account and website of Jim Ferguson. We will leave details and those links on this video, or near enough on this video, which will go onto my YouTube and Twitter account. Let me thank all my followers and subscribers to my YouTube channel as well. Jim, you and I will definitely speak again, sir, but thank you once again for a fantastic interview and your insight onto the situation with NATO. Thanks very much, Jim Ferguson.
My pleasure, Mark. It's lovely to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.